So Simon is with Unisys, and Simon's been doing employee experience for quite a long time in various settings. And I would say that he, from my own personal experience, he's quite the guru who combines both the technical aspects of employee experience with the psychological ones. And he's got great stories on it. I understand already that you're not allowed to say exactly everything that you'd like to say. So we're going to work around this, but if people are paying attention, they should be able to figure this out. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Simon, because I know it's a good story. Simon Wilson, ladies and gentlemen.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. I mean, how, very difficult act to follow with Jeffrey there. I don't have a slide about my background, but weirdly, I've probably been doing experience management for about 25 years. I probably didn't know I was for the first 15 of that. So I joined my career in IT a long time ago as a graduate at IBM, and very quickly I joined the performance team. So it was all about servers and response times and metrics and tuning databases. So actually there was an experience element to it. It was about giving productive time back to the business, but I didn't really have a thought about the user and how things really felt until one day I was sat at actually the Royal Air Force in one of the flying stations. Watching the pilots come in after doing mock dogfighting across the North Sea, and one of the guys turned to me. He was filling in a form that we put on in the application, and Jaguar pilot, and he turned to me and he said, "Oh, you've got a stopwatch?" I said, "Yeah, I've got a stopwatch." And he said, "Okay, come and measure this. This is the worst part of this." And then he said, "Do you know how long it takes me to fly, or how far I can fly in the same time it takes this transaction to run?" And that it kind of really brought it to life that actually, this response time stuff was actually a real thing, and it was really about experience. Anyway, I went on to eventually marry a clinical psychologist, and so we had lots of conversations about this stuff and how your brain works and how people react and all of those things. And we'll talk a bit later on about some of the stuff that Jeffrey's already covered around things like the link between employee experience and customer experience, and what that really has in terms of client or people coming back, and brand reputation and brand loyalty. So there's a little bit of that in here. But what I would say is that we're very proud and pleased to be one of the founder members of the XLA Institute. We think we're relatively mature in XLAs, although we've definitely not finished our journey. And you'll see some of that as well. So some of the stuff here is going to be stuff we've been doing for quite a long time, and some of it is relatively new as well. So hopefully you'll learn some stuff, and please submit your questions all the way along, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well pretty easily too. So without further ado, just the stuff I have to get through before we can get to the main stuff. So what is Unisys? So Unisys is a large IT organization based in the US, has been going for about 150 years. It's very strong in the kind of mainframe and even typewriter technology in the early days, and and still is going strong globally. The part of the business I work for in digital workplace services or solutions has about 10,000 people, mainly service desk and field engineers, and of course that means that in terms of experience management, we've got a huge impact to make in that world in terms of their work, making our own employees have a good experience, but also the clients and customers that they look after as well. So we've currently, as you can see here, we've got about 20 XLAs in production, but that is growing all the time, especially as we're starting to look at new domains, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so the experience era, let's talk about that. So the world has changed, so we, employees are now judging IT by their experience, not about uptime. I said in the performance world, it was about response times, and I've also done some availability stuff. So it was about uptime and capacity. It was about, CPU utilization. But actually, employees don't really care about that. They really care about their experience. And the other thing is that digital collaboration and physical experiences are starting to blend together. So what I would say is, your laptop doesn't make you happy. It can ruin your day, but on its own, it doesn't make your employee experience, complete. There are certainly other things that come into that, and that could be your physical workplace itself, but it's also other things such as how engaged you are with your objectives, whether you believe in what the company is trying to do, whether you're rewarded in the right way, whether your boss is a good person, whether you've got a good work-life balance. So there's a lot of other things that come into your overall experience as well. And the final one is organizations are redefining what service success actually means. So Jeffrey talked about this shift from SLAs to XLAs. And certainly, organizations are seeing that, employee experience and things like retention are really, huge measures of success around service as well. So as we talked about, You know, everything used to be about technology. You know, our services were kind of technology led, but things have changed, and now of course we're all about the experience. And so the rest of the presentation, I'm going to start talking about this case study we have with a large, it's difficult to describe what they do without telling you what they do, but it's an organization which is known for its innovation, and it's got a very charismatic leader as well, who is very well known for, I guess, you know, you could argue that he was seen as slightly a mad scientist for a long time, but now, you know, he's turned it into a multinational global operation and business, which is doing much more than just, you know, what he set out to achieve. So anyway, let's just go back to, you know, this SLA versus XLA thing. So SLA is focused on volume, timeliness, and quality, right? So let's just get us all level set now. SLAs keep the lawyers quiet, though. They don't make employees happy. And that's often a problem for organizations like mine, where we often look after law firms. And so they've often got more lawyers than we have. So obviously it's really important to keep them quiet. But the XLAs really focus on perception, sentiment, and the outcome. And the experience data that we're collecting now is connecting IT, but also HR and facilities as well. And we'll come into that. So as Jeffrey alluded to as well, so SLA is more about, you know, was it fixed? You know, was it fixed on time? But actually the XLA was, did it feel right? And I think that's, you know, really important, that distinction. So just a few kind of, I guess, how we do it. Before I get into what we've done, it's kind of like how we do it and why as well. So at Unisys, experience powers everything we do. So every single conversation starts about experience of the employees and the client employees that we're looking after. And actually, I joined Unisys about 2 years ago, and I was attracted by a blog post from our CEO where he talked about experience and he talked about XLAs. So I knew then that, you know, experience was embedded into the culture of Unisys from top to bottom. And I knew that was kind of like it was going to be, you know, my tribe, the place that I belonged. So yeah, I was keen to get a job, and I did. So anyway, I'm very happy. So in terms of what that means, so we use this the 5 Ps of proactive as our kind of framework for everything we do around experience. So it's about proactive experience management. So it's not just about measuring, it's about making sure that we're affecting the experience as well, and we're designing the experience and achieving what we aim to achieve. It's about preventative stuff. So it's about making sure that you've got the right device, that they're maintained and that they're updated with all the latest updates. And that it's a bit like servicing your car, changing the oil. The car's less likely to break down. So it's exactly that. It's about being protective, because you know that we have lots of threats to our environments, and many of those have an impact on experience. And actually, there's this constant battle between compliance teams and security that are making these devices and applications, you know, ever more difficult for us to access. And you know, there's certainly an experience angle to that as well. And actually, perhaps in the next presentation, I'll talk about the security XLAs that we're starting to build as well. So you know, it's everywhere. Experience is everywhere, as I said. But then there's also predictive. So we're using that data to predict where we're going to see experience pain. And actually, XLA is a great way of using the data in a predictive sense as well. And then finally, and for me, the most important thing is you've got all of this data. Now, what are you actually doing with it? What are you doing with the XLAs to actually change the experience or to improve it? How are you intervening before an issue actually takes effect? And how are you preventing any future occurrences of that as well? So that it's this kind of end-to-end support thing. It's built into that with knowledge, with automations and all of those things. So yeah, the 5 Ps of proactive experience management. And actually what it's all about is optimized employee experience and productivity underpinned by those XLAs. And I think that's, for us, there's a massive relationship between employee experience and productivity. And there's a kind of a theory on this, which is, you know, if you take away all of the things that get in the way of somebody being productive, you know, they can't help but be more productive. It's almost a servant leadership principle. But I think that's it. So the link between experience and productivity is absolutely key. So let's get on to our case study then. So we had a challenge with a client, or the client had a challenge. So we took over the account, and it's an account with about 15,000 employees worldwide. And there was frustration with inconsistent digital experiences. And not only was there frustration about those digital experiences, there was a lack of awareness from IT, from the exec team, about what those frustration points were. You know, they didn't know. They didn't know what. There was no awareness of what was going on. They knew they had to do something. And as I said, the good news is this is an innovative organisation that is really interested in pushing the envelope. So experience was a really good thing for them to latch onto as well. They also had fragmented data across IT and facilities. it's all over the place, as it were. And the other one was, there was decline in satisfaction despite strong SLA performance. And I'm sure many people on the call today will be talking about the watermelon effect. And it was exactly that. SLA is good, actual experience poor. So there was a turning point. A new experience vision has Unisys landed on the account. So, and it's really in partnership as well. So it's a partnership with Unisys to shift from metrics to meaning. And when I say partnership, it truly is, super high amounts of client engagement. The client's really interested in the data, in the initiatives, in the actions, and enabling us and empowering us to do the job that we're paid to do. So that's, and I'll stress that again at the end of the presentation. Engagement with the client and with your sponsoring executive is key. And Jeffrey mentioned that it goes right to the top of his organisation as well. The next one was the introduction of an XLA framework aligned to business outcomes, and that aligned to business outcomes thing is crucial, and I'll talk about that again in a second. And the next one was the data-driven cross-domain approach. So it has to be data-driven, and whether that's the sentiment piece or whether that's the telemetry stuff as well. And cross-domain, I'll talk about what that means in a minute, but really that's beyond DEX, beyond the laptop, beyond the kind of applications. Okay, so the digital lens. So let's talk about XLAs. And the first XLA we've got is what we call the XLA, so the digital experience XLA. And I've tried to describe here in a picture that's going to come up how it kind of layers up in terms of from a tool all the way to a service. So hopefully many of you will recognize the dashboard that I'm putting on here. So this is from one of the lead DEX providers. It might not necessarily be the one I'm using on this account, but it is one of the ones that many people would have seen and heard of. So this is the DEX platform. And what that gives us is a set of dashboards. And in those dashboards, it collects telemetry. It provides some AI insights about the things we should worry about today and even tomorrow and in the longer term. It also allows us to collect sentiment for engagement campaigns. And it also allows us to carry out remediations, which are either self-heal automations where devices are fixing themselves, or whether that's a one-click automation after somebody's actually called the desk and reported an issue. So that's kind of the foundational part of this. There needs to be some way of collecting data, but it doesn't need to be a DEX platform. And I'll talk about that as well later. And then we layer on the next thing here, which is the personas. Now for us, and I guess everybody was struggling to articulate the value of experience. Everybody kind of knows at a fundamental level that experience is important, but actually when you start putting it into a spreadsheet and the accountants take over, the business case is often difficult to articulate as well. But actually what we found was the organizations, as Jeffrey said, right, experience is completely linked to the bottom line. So if you can link your experience measures and your strategy to the bottom line and identify those people in the organization that are the key contributors, and it doesn't feel very comfortable to say it, but in organizations, not everybody is created equally in terms of their contribution to the bottom line. And so if we identify those people, such as innovators, and in this organization that we're talking about, R&D and design is seen as probably the most important part. That is, they are known as a design organization. It's not Apple, but they are, in terms of the designs, they are classics that are, you would, if you saw one of their products, you would know that they made it. It's instantly known. So their design and innovation team is absolutely critical. So we have a persona around those. The next one around the corner is the makers, the production line staff, the people that are actually making the products as well. If they can't work because of IT issues, then obviously that's a problem for the whole business and the bottom line. Moving on to the other side, we've got the sellers. So these are the people that are actually dealing with the retailers and selling to the in bulk. But of course, if they can't sell, then they can't sell. No products being moved, and then the bottom line's being impacted again. And then finally, and less important for this organisation maybe, but servers as well. So, and when I talk about servers, it's not the IT type, because to be honest, if the IT type of servers fall over, they don't care. They don't have an opinion or an experience. But this is about frontline workers. This is about people in restaurants that are providing that customer experience. So again, a direct impact on revenue. So that's the four kind of groups, the main groups that we look at in terms of personas. But then there's a special class of persona as well, which is new joiners. And new joiners is really important as well, because the time it takes now in our kind of hybrid world to come up to speed and time to productive, that is really difficult when you're not necessarily in a physical office like we would have been before. I mean, I have a personal experience of joining Unisys, which is a US-based organization. I got my laptop 2 years ago on a Monday. on a Tuesday was meant to be my first day at work, so my laptop was built on the Monday. On Tuesday, I logged in at 9 o'clock and I had nobody to talk to. And I basically, I found myself in the org chart. I found my boss and I looked to see who else was in my team and was there anybody on green in Teams, and there was. And so I called them. I said, "Hi, I'm your new teammate. I just needed somebody to talk to." So even my own personal experience is, that everybody as a new joiner needs that kind of help and support. And I think as a persona, it's important to recognize that. And then the next part is the XLAs themselves. So now we've got our DEX platform, we've got the personas. Now we're going to apply our XLAs. In terms of our DEX LAs, we have at least 4. There's more than that, but these are the main ones. So we have velocity. As you can imagine, it's all about speed of devices and things like that. We've got precog, and actually that's about time back or time saved from previous failures that would have happened if we hadn't done something about it. There's balance, and then there's also flow. I think balance is about stability in the device, and flow, I can't even remember what that one is, but we'll work that out because I think we've got a thing later on. And then actually, but how does this all hang together? So we've got a tool, we've got our personas, we've identified, we've got our XLAs, but actually we need to drive it and drive the action and the impact. And so that's done through the XMO, the Experience Management Office. And for us, we've got 4 main roles. We have an experience delivery lead, who is managing the action plan and the prioritization and the stakeholder management. We have automation engineers carrying out those automations and doing the testing and implementing those. We have proactive engineers living in the data, living, day and night, breathing, what's normal, what's good, what's bad, that kind of policeman's nose thing. And then we've got the analysis teams as well that are writing the reports, that are keeping on the XLAs themselves on track and those kind of things. So when you add all of those things together, you end up with a proper service that is able to make an impact around experience. Okay, so as an example then, let's get into some real life examples. So this is an actual XLA client dashboard. I've redacted some of the XLA descriptions there. And I said before, you can kind of work some of this stuff out. Responsiveness, stability, and performance is in here. The actual descriptions I'm unable to share, but as you can see here, so each of the XLA groups has a score over the month, and then we report that in the monthly report that we have with the client. And of course, if anything happens along the way, we talk to the client on a daily basis as well. So yeah, that's the way it kind of gets reported back. And the trend, we also include the baseline. Really important to include the baseline here too. So where we started from effectively and the improvements that we've made. And there's a piece at the end of this as well that I'll talk about invisible services. And one of the things we really need to make sure that we don't do in experience management is be invisible. I mean, we're intending, if you think about it, we're trying to take away the pain that people would have had if we weren't there, but therefore they're not going to have the pain. And there's more glory in a fix often than a prevention, but we need to make sure that we shout as loud as we can about the improvements and benefits that we've had in order to be seen of value as well. So I'll talk about that at the end in the hallmark section. So it's about staying relevant as well. So you do that by measuring what matters really. So as I said, identify the key contributing personas to business success. That's the first one. The next one is make sure in your XLAs that you are trying to directly relate those to the organizational objectives or the desired people outcomes as well. And a people outcome might be, retention, it might be happiness, it might be sentiment as well. But it's really important if you want to, to really have an impact and have a compelling story, you've got to link back to what the organization is actually there to achieve and the business of the organization, and that could be revenue and profit as well. The next one, it's about translating all of that data and telemetry into what's the human impact. So things like a crash or hang in an application, well, what does that really mean? How much time was lost? So that translation is really important as well, and bringing that to the fore. And the next one, and it's probably the most critical thing, right? It's about prioritizing the actions through governed plans. And what that really means is making sure that the client agrees with the stuff that you're going to do in terms of the action plans, making sure you have an action plan, because what you tend to find is XMOs and these tools, they bring up lots and lots of issues that you didn't know you had before, but you can't fix everything at once. So it's about low-hanging fruit, it's about the biggest bang for buck, it's about the biggest benefit, the most impacted users, the worst applications and those kind of things. So yeah, having that action plan and through governance as well, the agreement from the client is super important too. And actually, so that was XLA, but let's move the story up into those other things. As I said before, there are other areas of experience that are important to us as employees, and there are some drivers for this as well. So yeah, return to office. It's kind of a done thing now, but actually yeah, there's a statement that the workplace itself, the physical workplace, has regained its crown as the center of productivity. And actually, these are stats from the end of last year, and we're expecting that at the end of this year it'll be even higher. But 75% of workers are required to be in the office 3 days a week, and 40% are required to be in the office 5 days a week. So for this organisation we're talking about today, they kind of have a blend. They've got manufacturing staff who are there, in an office or in a building 5 days a week, and then they've got many other people that are only there 3 days a week as well. So there is a balance, but it's the physical workplace is an important thing. You really have to worry about and look after that. And then there's some science as well in terms of why that's important. So Harvard University did a study to find that in buildings that are well ventilated and had low levels of CO2, that cognitive function scores were 90% higher. And that's significant. And we've all had that feeling of the mid-afternoon lull when the office got a bit warm, and we're all feeling a little bit, had lunch and whatever. And the next one is that so 3% of productivity is lost for every degree above 20 degrees centigrade as well, and that's a double loss over 25 degrees C as well. And that was done by the World Health Organization, and that was only last month that research was released. So have a look at that. But in my own experience as well, I was in a meeting in London a few weeks ago, and there was about 10 of us in quite a small meeting room. It was one of those kind of WeWork offices things, a shared office environment. And we'd had the typical trouble of setting up the room. And then I noticed that everybody was starting to flag, and you could just see people flagging. And in front of me was the little screen, and it had an air quality meter, and it told me that the CO2 level was getting a bit high. Anyway, the concierge opened the door. She said, would anybody like anything? Every single person at the back of the room asked for a coffee. You could just see, so a physical proper impact. I could see it in real life of what was happening when air quality started to suffer. So it's really important, So we've all gone back to the office, and also the science says the office needs to be well maintained in order for us to be productive there as well. So, but in terms of those other developments that are driving workplace XLAs, why haven't we done this before? Of course, so we've got technology changes. So sensors, control systems in smart buildings, we can use that data to build into the XLA calculations. We've got organizations constantly seeking more efficient ways of doing things. So for us, there's a trend towards merging service desks. So that might be the facilities service desk merging with IT or HR. As again, from that experience perspective, you want your employees to be helped. And often employees like just to have one number, one contact to make in terms of getting that help in the organization. And the next thing is about the XMO itself and the principles. I mentioned those 5 Ps earlier. So the XMO itself, its maturity and the principles it's created, well, they apply to the workplace data as much as they do to the desktop data as well. So it's kind of a, this goal. We've got the data, we've got the impetus and the from the organizations, and we've also got the teams and the processes and the practices that's well versed as well. So it's an ideal, triage of things. So let's have a similar diagram to what we had before, but let's now look at the physical data and how we're going to collect that and how that all works and comes together. So we've got slightly different tools now. We've still got DEX platform in here. And the reason we've got the DEX platform in there is because we need to still capture the sentiment. So we can capture sentiment about buildings by using surveys that are generated through the DEX platform. Because what the DEX platform allows us to do is to talk to every user or every employee. We've also got the sensors and the IoT data coming from the smart buildings around air quality. And then we've also got applications. And in there, I'm talking about things like Microsoft Teams itself, and physical office spaces, and also things like booking systems. As we have gone back to the office, of course, often you now have to book a parking space, you might have to book an EV charger, you might have to book a desk. So there are many applications now that are kind of helping towards our RTO and reduced office space. Then the same personas we talked about before, we're not going to cover those again, but it's exactly the same ones as before. But we've got some different XLAs now. So we have workplace wellbeing, and that is about air quality, and it's about all of those things that keep us nice and healthy. We've got site services, and I was surprised that in the survey results that we've had, one of those site services is quality and quantity of food in the canteens and in the restaurants. That can have a real impact. And actually, there is a story around, and I'm not going to say whether it was this client or not, but apparently the CEO of an organisation was doing a walkabout one lunchtime and asked where everybody was. Where is everybody? There's nobody in the office. And somebody said, yeah, they're all at they've all gone into town to buy a sandwich. And he said, well, why is that? And they said, well, actually the canteen's not that great. So he said, hang on a minute, I can't have this. So apparently he went straight back, and the first thing he did was order the canteen to be extended, and for free lunches to be given to everybody to try to keep everybody in the office. So I said that's that kind of servant leadership approach. It's a bit of a blunt instrument there, but certainly it had the effect that I think he was after. So people are now at the desk and working harder. And as I mentioned, the reservation and scheduling systems, of course, that's another one where we've got XLAs around that. And then finally, collaboration spaces, because we think that, you know, one of the real reasons that we're sending people to go back to offices is exactly that, is to collaborate, right? So if they are going to collaborate, we need to create the spaces that allows them to do that. Otherwise, what's the point? So it's not just the formal meeting rooms, but it's also the informal collaboration spaces as well. And the water cooler moments even, you know, there's a reason for bringing those back. And all still managed by the same XMO that we had before. So XMO has a bigger responsibility now, but it's certainly using all that extra data in that way. Okay, so I've not got a moonwalking bear in my presentation, but I do have a scene from The Office, and hopefully this will resonate with many people here. So this is a typical scene from The Office, and this is about physical meetings. So let's start here, right? So you turn up to a meeting room, and of course, there's people in there already, you know, and their meeting's overrunning, they're not getting out yet, so you'll kind of hang about outside. Of course, anybody that's at home going to join that meeting, they've already joined, they were on time, you know, they're wondering where everybody is. Finally, the team's able to enter the room, and then straight away somebody says, wow, it's stuffy, it's hot. Somebody goes and attempts to change the temperature, and then there's some trouble connecting to the screen, and eventually it happens because 5 minutes later, you know, there's somebody that stood up, he's tried to use that little iPad thing in the middle of the desk, and he had trouble, and then, you know, wing man or wing lady stood up and said, actually, let me help you, I can do this. And then 5 minutes later, we're now connected to the screen, happy day. So 10 minutes after we were meant to start, we now have a productive meeting that's about to start. Anyway, then it switches presenter, and of course the HDMI cable is too short, it doesn't fit. And then guess what? The room's now too cold because we didn't drop it by 1 degree, we dropped it by 10 degrees. So now it's too cold, so somebody has to get up again. You know, and that's kind of a typical scene that goes out across many meeting rooms. And of course, that's not even including anything around the tech not working, whether that's the microphones, the cameras, and all those kind of things as well. So I think all of us can kind of resonate with that story. So yeah, and there's some research actually from Barco, I think it was, where they're saying about, I think it's 10 minutes on average is lost from physical meetings because of trouble with technology. So I think it's really important that we start to measure that. And of course, the good news is that this client we do. So this client has about over 450 meeting rooms worldwide, which is quite a lot. And of course, there's a reverse that goes on in terms of what you would normally think about in terms of meeting rooms, because many organizations are trying to make to have, you know, as an efficient organization as they can, and that means minimizing the number of meeting rooms that are required, because they're actually quite expensive to set up, you know, and to run and operate, and they take up building space. Whereas employees have the opposite effect, which is they want lots of meeting rooms so that when they want a physical meeting, it's actually quite easy to book one and they don't waste time trying to rebook or whatever. So yeah, there is that kind of contradiction there going on in terms of business objectives. And, you know, sometimes SLAs compete and sometimes XLAs compete as well with the SLAs. But so what we do is we take data from, there's 4 different sources. One of them is sentiment. And there's some technical stuff. I think the last, I've got it redacted there, but the last box, which is 3.10 over here, I think that represents meeting room occupancy. So yeah, as I said, employees prefer them to be empty. So, and we can do this kind of XLA, we can calculate that based on per room, per floor, per building, campus, per country, you know, whatever you want really. And we tend to have a slightly higher XLA for the VIP meeting rooms in terms of performance. And actually, it reminds me, there was something I should have said about personas. You would have noticed that I don't have a VIP persona. And that's specifically for one reason, which is VIPs aren't particularly interesting from an experience perspective. And that's generally because, number one, they have the best devices. Number two, they use the least number of applications, you know, Teams, PowerPoint, Outlook, and Excel. And number three, if they want help, they can normally make a phone call and somebody runs to them within about 10 minutes. So actually, from an experience perspective, you know, they're normally shown as pretty high on a kind of XLA. So yeah, from a persona perspective, we don't really look at them in any great detail unless we're kind of asked to by the client. But the thing is, okay, we've now got this XLA data, and so, you know, we're measuring stuff, but how can we actually do some things with that to reduce the friction? So here we go. So how about proactive assistance, which is driven by the XLAs? So when that meeting room is offline, because we've measured it, we've captured that data, how about reaching out to the person that's booked it to say, actually, that meeting room's not working. So maybe you want to go and book another one. So that sounds pretty good, and that's kind of the current state. But the state we're working on at the moment is, okay, we don't leave the employee with a problem. That's kind of like, here's a problem for you that you didn't have, you had. I told you about the problem, I'm going away. Don't do that. Don't leave them with the problem. Come up with a solution. So why not automatically rebook a similar room in the same place and send them that email? And then also there's a kind of a business perspective to this as well, which is, okay, sometimes all the rooms are going to be booked. But if the system can understand whether it's an internal meeting versus a customer or client meeting, then of course the customer or client meeting takes precedence, and that will be bounced at the end of the internal meeting will be bounced. So use the XLA for positive action and positive good for the organization as well. I think that's the message there. And then coming on to other aspects of the XLAs as well then. So now we're looking at this is the workplace wellbeing one. So as we said, we're looking at temperature, humidity, airflow, air quality. All of those things have quite an impact. And as you can see here in May, the XLA was impacted quite severely. We normally bounce around between 99 and 98, but it was 91. And then in terms of the telemetry that drove that, that's in this chart down here. Effectively, that the yellow line is the outside temperature. There was a kind of exceptional weather event in this country in May. It wasn't expected, and therefore, yeah, it basically breached the airflow, which I think is measured in the blue line here. Oh, actually, no, it might be down here in this the blue line. Yeah, the airflow there was working at maximum. The AC systems weren't able to output any more than they could, and therefore the internal temperature, which is represented by these red bars, exceeded the design target that we had, and that then manifested itself in terms of what happened. So it was 5 degrees above for a few hours that day, and there were 4 tickets raised to the facilities desk. But what we did about that was there was an engagement campaign that was sent out using the DEX platform, understanding, because the DEX platform can also tell where people are. So for those people in the office that day, we didn't waste time of everybody else by telling them that the office was too hot if they weren't there. Basically, saying, look, we know about it, we're working on it, because obviously there's, communicate, set somebody's expectation, and they generally have a good experience or a better experience than they would have had. It's easier to change it's cheaper and easier to change the perception of somebody's experience than it is to change the actual experience. That's a quote from a book that I'll let you know about at the end if you want. And so no tickets were received after that comms was issued, because people understood their anxieties were low, somebody was working on it, okay. And then there was like a future plan as well, maybe shut the blinds on days where weather events were expected, maybe consider the design of the air conditioning as well, and maybe send out notes to people to say, actually, if you'd be better off working from home on those days, then maybe you might want to do that as well. So yeah, there's again a really important little case study there for this account about workplace wellbeing. And moving on, just in terms of where that fits in terms of Unisys's kind of strategy around all of this stuff. Actually, I've gone through the slide. So it's part of our sustainable workplace solution. So we're looking at all of these things that are on here, and every single time we come up with a solution, as I said, experience is everywhere for us. And every single one of these, I'm not so sure about liquid cooling maintenance, looking at that one, but every other element that we've got here generally has an experience measure that we're always asking, okay, what's the XLA that we could attach to that? How would we measure that? How would it improve things? Every single thing that's on this slide. So it's part of this kind of holistic sustainable workplace strategy as well. We're not doing this in isolation for a client because we thought it was a good idea. It's part of our kind of go-to-market strategy in total. Okay, and now I'm trying to go forward on my slide, and this one's not going forward. Here we go. But we've ended up with a problem, of course, and some of you may have thought about that already. We're now collecting masses of experience data. Up until now, it was all contained within that DEX platform, and it's quite nice and handy to have. But of course, now we've got data coming from all these different sources. We've got the air quality, the temperature stuff, we've got parking space availability, we've got sentiment, we've got smart buildings, we've got knowledge, we've got huge amounts of data. So how do you kind of manage that? So for us, we've invested in our own platform. So it's an AI-based data engine that is linked to knowledge as well. So and the kind of service desk agent assist technology too. All of that stuff is all kind of linked. as this kind of holistic data platform, and you can ask it any question, and it's providing insights, and it's joining up that kind of sentiment and deck stuff. And the idea is that we'll get to a point where it's about enterprise level automations. It's not about laptop automation. It's about enterprise level ones and escalations as well. And what this tool is really great at doing for us is about identifying the anomalies and the differences and the trends, and predicting the failure. That's what it's really there for about, and joining up, for example, service desk data about the number of Outlook issues that have been reported this morning, and the DEX data in terms of what that thinks about performance of Outlook on the different devices. Joining that up into like a super alert to say, look, we've got a real problem here that's really accelerating, and somebody needs to look at this right now. You've got that kind of immediacy attached to this in real time. And then you've also got the more kind of strategic, what we're going to do about Outlook and versions, different versions, and the performance of those over time as well. So a lot more kind of data on that too. Anyway, so that's SEA, as we call it, our Service Experience Accelerator. But just a quick one on, okay, what happens when you get it right then? What we've talked about, these case studies, what we're doing at this client. But actually, so we're doing something like 40,000 proactive remediations every 6 months, which has reduced tickets by about 8%. Tickets is great. However, there's also that side benefit as well of the people that haven't raised the ticket, suffered in silence. They're also benefiting from those automations that are fixing those things as well. We have optimized meeting room design and location strategy, because we're feeding that data back in about usage, about failure rates, because it turns out, why is it that people are choosing certain meeting rooms? It might be based on size, it might be based on the facilities, whiteboards or whatever in the room, but actually often it's based on how much sunlight comes in the room and how hot it gets, and whether you can see the screen, and whether it, and whether the blinds are working. It's really coming down to those kind of things. Also, how many stairs you might have to walk up. So it's, the sentiment really tells you a lot about understanding what's really going on. But that's about the ROI. But ROE, that's return on experience or return on employee. So there's a reduced employee churn. The attrition rate in this organisation is less than 15%, and the onboarding time, as I said, those new joiners, that's been reduced by 3 days on average, which is really important for them as well. In terms of engagement with the surveys that we're sending out now, we get about an 89% engagement rate for those. And that's also helped us accelerate the adoption of new tools, because people are interested in the comms that we send them, because they're targeted, and therefore, they think it's quite interesting and exciting, and they'll do things that we ask them to do, such as use new tools and technology at the point we ask them to do it. And then also around things like sentiment. So we've had a 35% improvement in CSAT, and also a 15% NPS increase as well. So these things, our client is a complete advocate actually, although again, they don't really talk about themselves, but we, new clients that want to come and talk to us about experience, this client is more than happy to come and talk to them every single time, and is a complete advocate for our services. But some kind of proper tips now in terms of how do you make this all work then, right? So don't just focus on ticket reduction. It has an impact and a benefit, but it's probably about 10% of the overall ROI for this stuff. So don't just focus on that. Make sure you integrate DEX into the service desk. Give the service desk analysts and agents access to your DEX data. That's really important as well. And one-click automations, because it just takes, closing those calls down for the people that actually call is amazing. Also, you then get the feedback loop, which allows you into knowledge, which allows you to create the automations to get rid of these issues as well. Embrace automation, of course, but in my experience, many automations are workarounds. So fixing the actual issue and the cause of that is probably even more important and better. As we said, think experience beyond the device. Your laptop does not make you happy. It can ruin your day, but it doesn't make you happy. It's the other things that are really important to your productivity and your experience. Again, super important, I mentioned this earlier, so have an agreed action plan to improve the XLAs. It's an action plan with prioritize as well. Make sure you invest in the right skills and people. Buy a DEX tool, it doesn't just work. There are many cases where you buy a DEX tool and at the end of the year, you're questioning the value and wondering whether you should renew it. So you have to have the right people and the right operation to make it work for you. And when you do that, make sure you choose the right tools. Don't just choose the cheapest. There's lots of advice out there in terms of the tools to buy, and some of them are cheap, and they're cheap for a reason. And again, this came back to the question that Alan called earlier with Jeffrey. So I think one of the key things is make sure that the employees know that you act on the sentiment. So if they've bothered to talk to you, you need to be bothered to listen to what they're saying and do something about it, and then prove that you've done it as well. So you said we did is like incredibly important in that. Make sure someone's accountable for experience, because otherwise you end up with accountability that's kind of shared, and therefore nobody takes ownership at all. So make sure there's always somebody accountable, and for us that's about having somebody on our side as well as on the client side as well. As I mentioned, be loud of success, because invisible has little value, right? I used to manage capacity teams, and my boss once said to me, why do I need a capacity team? We've never run out of capacity, right? And it's kind of the same with experience as well. We need to, keep our feet paddling underwater like, furious ducks and swans, but actually above it, and we need to tell people about that, and we're not very good at marketing ourselves in terms of the value of what we add there as experienced professionals, but we really need to. Make sure the employees always have the right device. It's probably the easiest way to make sure they have a good experience. Just give them the device they need for their job, and all of the other tools they need for their jobs as well. And then finally, make sure you create baselines and investigate the deviations. Don't wait until it breaks. I think that's kind of really important as well. And then I'm kind of coming to the end now, but here's some stuff from Gartner. It's not just me saying this. So through 2027, 80% of experience projects that only focus on those IT use cases are going to fail to achieve an ROI. So, it's much, much bigger than that. And, Jeffrey mentioned the Starbucks case, with the baristas walking out of the door. That wasn't an IT use case for baristas. It was an IT use case for an app that didn't work very well. But yeah, so just remember that part of it. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Lot of information there, a lot of information. I do have a couple of questions here. I see some raised hands as well, but I'm going to ask you the question I've got right in front of me. In the presentation, you've talked about lots of different data sources to build this picture. And but if I am just starting out, if I don't have all these tools or budget or business case to build this out, is there something I can do which is more of a low-hanging fruit starting point?
Well, yeah, so I've just actually been working with a client which has got exactly that problem. So they know they've got an experience issue, don't know where to start, don't really have money to invest in tools. And the answer is go and ask people, go and talk to them. Do you have Microsoft Forms? Yes. Okay, well, you can use that then. So sentiment, capture sentiment. Experience starts with sentiment. Go and ask people what their problems are. I think that's the key part of this.
Okay, just talk. Now, Walter Benjamin's got a hands up, and I don't know how to talk. I don't see a question, Walter. So maybe I don't know how I do this.
The question Alan.
Sorry?
You can see the question now in the questions list. He's typed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you click on it, you'll see it.
Okay, 1 second. Sorry. There you go. I'm a bit slow here. I don't see it. Hang on. Oh, I know what I've got to do. I've got to go back to the thread. There you go. Where? Oh yeah. Can you share more details behind the Gardner study that you mentioned, Simon?
Yeah, so there's I can do that after the event. So there's a link to their article. That there's a couple of papers that they've written in there. Certainly.
Okay. And I have another one here from Adam. Have you got any stories on how you turn bad experiences into good experiences?
Turn bad experiences into good experiences. Yeah, lots. So I mean, on this client, but also others. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, so I worked on an account where effectively devices were crashing. They were crashing because of some performance issues affecting. It was in a call center as well, so you can imagine it was in a call center for an insurance company, right? And in this insurance company, they were taking calls from people whose basically it was medical emergencies and deaths while abroad, right? So quite a serious thing to be doing, taking calls. And these guys are having the call operators are having problems with their devices in terms of performance, and would literally have to say, sorry, my machine's just gone really slow. I can't help you with this case, or I'm going to have to transfer you to somebody else. Like really, when people are most distressed, to have that kind of impact is like really bad. And so, yeah, my team were brought in to look at that kind of experience issue, that direct one, and we fixed that within a couple of weeks of gathering data. It was before the days of DEX. DEX platforms didn't exist, so we kind of had our own thing. We built it in Splunk. Went and did some stuff, and we built it. But yeah, the impact that had and the feedback that we got after was, it was amazing. It made a proper human impact, and that's I think when it really helped.
Cool. Well, those are all the questions I've got, Simon. So thank you so much, and sorry that VJ sort of left you with the whole presentation. I think it's interesting, and I think the thing that I found interesting on this is the emphasis on the non-sexy things that are important, and I think that's always the interesting thing, right? Because we say that it's all about sentiment, and then we talk about very, very non-sexy things that influence, like the quality of air or airflow, and that turns out to be pretty substantial in terms of people's effectiveness or productivity. So I know. So what made you? I'm going to think of it. What made you even think about that? Because for me, and I just make that sentence off. XLAs have come a little bit full circle, because the guy that actually created the concept of XLAs, Marcel Brouwels, didn't do it for IT. He did it for facilities. And it was part of his thesis that we spent all this money learning about the buildings, about airco and electricity usage and fuel usage, and we don't know anything about whether the people like working in the buildings. And so that's how he got into it. So I'm just interested to see how did you even go down this route?
So it was a personal experience, actually. And it goes back to my time in IBM. So we were in the top floor of a military building, and working on this client account, the Royal Air Force it was at the time. And it was super hot one summer, glass floor to ceiling, super hot, wasn't great. I had a thermometer on my wall next to my desk. So every single day I would call up the facilities and say, it's too hot here, right? And they would come back with stuff like, it doesn't really matter, it's about airflow, not about temperature. And I kept making complaints to the point that the maintenance man came and took away the thermometer. That was their I would say 0.5 degrees now, and their fix was to stop me from being able to measure how bad it was. And then that was probably my first kind of thing about the impact that building was having on me. So that was a long time ago. And then in my work, so I'm a solution manager, so my job is to think about the future and the roadmap and where we're going to take this stuff. And I kind of built this Maslow's hierarchy of experience, starting with where we started from, which is like laptops and decks, but then moving through into the physical side of it. And then those bringing things in around restaurants and the things that you really care about, because of my own personal experience, because I have an experience as well. I'm an employee. I turn up to physical buildings. So using that kind of experience, and as I said, and then getting into that higher piece as well, which is in terms of an IT organization trying to sell services is more difficult, but the HR aspect around employee engagement with their objectives, and that's the next challenge as well. So it's part of that Maslow's hierarchy of experience that I'm trying to kind of build.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you so much, Simon. I thought it was incredibly interesting. It's always good to learn more stuff. Thank you.